All right, while I'm waiting, I'm gonna do a mic test. So test 1 2 1 2 3. All right, while I'm waiting, I'm gonna do a mic test. So test 1 2 1 2 3. Okay, looks all right here. Looks fine here. Looks different. Yeah, I don't know why. It's weird. Well, all right, I'm gonna do some stuff in the meantime. Where is this? Where are those hairs coming from? I don't understand. There's one here. All right, so for people who are watching, hello, good day. Today is technically my birthday, but I'm working hard, so I can't seem to clean the glasses today. Weird sounds outside. Okay, the temperature is tricky here. Maybe 23.5. Yep, it's good. I'm gonna share the link. Okay, well, that's my page. And the Age of Reason page. All right, now it should be all set. All right. What are they doing outside? Seriously. Strange people. Yeah, I'm good to go, I think. So I'll just close this. I'm gonna keep that for now. All right. Just move over here. Hey, so I'm just waiting for people to show up on the live. If you know, some people are kind of out there and they want to listen in. If you watch this on YouTube, which I'm doing right now, there is a chat on the side, and so you can use that chat. And you can ask questions. Say anything you want. Almost, I would say. But today I'm going to talk about climate change again and COVID-19. So it's a bit interrelated, or a lot, I should say. So yeah, if you have any kind of questions on climate change or COVID-19, then go ahead. Today's the day. Just give it a minute and I'm gonna start. I can't clean my glasses today for some reason. Really, really difficult. All right, well, why don't we get started then? So I'm going to check the audio here. It's still the same. I don't know why it was so low. Maybe, let's see, properties. Nope, that's fine. Recording. Test, test, 1, 2. What? It's impossible though. Test, test, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. It should be, I don't know what that is. Even Sound Blaster Array. I have no idea what that is. Okay. Oh, I don't know what they're doing, but noisy people. All right, let's get started. So this one is this one, right? Okay, good. Okay, so 3, 2, 1. Hey everyone, I'm JC and welcome to Age of Reason. So today is actually technically my birthday, but I'm working hard. It's like that song, she works hard for the money, but I work hard for no money because my show is not making a profit whatsoever. I just want to remind people that I have my book out on Amazon, so please get it. It's a great read. If you enjoy reading books, then, this is right up your alley. And today I'm going to talk about climate change and coronavirus. So the solutions to both are often similar, and I'm going to talk why that is. So the title here is Why the Solutions to Coronavirus and Climate Change Are the Same. The global spread of the coronavirus is intricately intertwined with the climate crisis. It is a problem exacerbated and likely brought on by environmental degradation of our own making, and how we respond to it could impact the health of the planet and everyone in it in ways that reverberate for generations to come. So I commented on that on the last show. I said, you look at, for example, the Trump administration, and they passed like trillion-dollar packages, which mostly went to bail out the companies and not the people. People need money right now. People need to pay the rent, etc., food, and so they gave that money to corporations like the airline industry. The airline industry is heavy polluter. I'm not in favor of it whatsoever. So should you let it die? Well, I don't know. That depends how you view the future. Because if you look at the transportation of the future, then why not start investing in it right now? So instead, we invested money back into these archaic corporations. And it's true that we don't know the true impact of that yet. Global recession, most likely. You have you have many trillions of dollars in the hole suddenly. Most likely it's going to be an economic recession, big one too. The economic slowdown has temporarily led to cleaner air and resurgence of wildlife in some cities hard hit by the virus. So, and in some cases this is fake news, because I know that somebody shared like a dolphin in Venice, and that was fake. Okay, there's no dolphins in Venice, but there you can see more clearly through the water there, and I think they saw jellyfish in there. So there's that, but the dolphin thing is not real. At the same time, there are indications that the pandemic is distracting from and derailing climate efforts, and that's certainly true. So they mentioned here that international meetings have been canceled. I don't really understand why. I thought like video conferencing is a thing in the 21st century. And in fact, the UN held certain video conferencing already. They had some funny moments there, because the first question is, can you hear me? But they did do it, so I don't really see why it's canceled. Probably because they try to, if you're a corporation that depends on polluting the planet, then in your case, you have to do everything in your power to keep delaying these negotiations, because you have to keep polluting until that happens. So yeah, that's one strategy that they use. So these names here, over here, I commented on that before. I'm gonna say that's Bernstein. I know that in America sometimes it's Bernstein for some reason, but it's not written that way. So I think it's an Americanization of the name. So this is Bernstein. So he's a doctor, PhD. He's an expert on the health impacts of climate change, and so he's gonna say what he thinks about all that. So why does the virus pandemic, what does it have to do with climate change? Well, the connections between them are very real. Evidence is already emerging that shows that, for example, air pollution is increasing the odds of people who will die from COVID-19. So I said that on the last show, and this is where it came from. So they say here that if you have pre-existing conditions from pollution, you have an increased chance of death by 15%. They do mention here that later they revised that down to 8%. But again, as I mentioned, 8% for some people, it's really the difference between life and death. 8% is 8%, you know? Can't run away from it. We know that the air pollution in the US is from burning fossil fuels, burning gas in cars, burning coal in power plants overwhelmingly. And that pollution is killing people with COVID. So climate solutions are pandemic solutions. Well, that's true, yes. If we reduce the pollution, then we have healthier people. That's the thing. Another connection is deforestation. Depending on how you cut the pie, around 20% of carbon emissions may relate in some way to deforestation. And deforestation is also a major contributor to infectious disease emergence. We don't necessarily understand how COVID emerged yet. The conspiracy theorists will point to that Chinese lab, but we have every reason to believe that it came into people from bats. And they're going to explain later why. So they say, for example, that Ebola, which is somehow making a small comeback in Africa right now, in some places there, we have evidence that suggests that destruction of forests in West Africa contributed to the movement of bats north. And that deforestation may have forced animal-human encounters that otherwise wouldn't have happened. In the Amazon rainforest, deforestation is strongly associated with malaria. So yes, if you cut down the forests, you're destroying natural habitats, and then so these bats and other animals that live there, they have to move because again, survival is the key there. So in the case of bats, they're going to move into areas with more people perhaps and mix in there. And of course, bats do carry the coronavirus. Not just bats, there are other animals too. So if they're out there in the wild amongst themselves, usually it's fine. But when they start mixing with people, that's when the problem starts. People see that the coronavirus is an existential threat. Well, that's debatable because, again, if you look at the overall population of the planet, and even if you count all the infected right now, let's round it up to about 8 million people, it's still a tiny, tiny fraction of the world's population. So yeah, I know that I think some people are making it worse than it is, and some people are making it not as bad as it is. So it's kind of like this middle ground there. We see the death counts mounting, we feel it coming, and we act. The climate crisis is killing us too, and we are failing to see that, or we just failing to act. Well, kind of both, I would say. I see, protests of. It's kind of interesting because we have people protesting the COVID-19 because those people are just tired. So these are like assholes, okay? Like screw them. Then we have protests for the racism. So this, the black man dies somewhere, police brutality, racism, etc. People start protesting in the street, start rioting in the street. And when it comes to climate change, it's not really moving very quickly at all. We have, and again, I don't think that the people are fairly represented. So climate change is going to affect the poor people most of all. They're the most vulnerable people. So instead, we have a spokesperson who is Greta Thunberg, and she comes from Sweden. She's white. In Sweden, I think they have universal health care. I'm not sure, but they might have like public free tuition colleges and stuff like that. So she's doing well, She is not like representative of the people who are really suffering from it on a daily basis. Just have to be said. The medical establishment has been wildly ineffective at preventing obesity, so they're just mentioning obesity as one pre-existing condition here. What does it take? So people have to eat less red meat. Well, in my case, I already am. I had some kind of horrible food poisoning, and I just can't eat certain foods anymore. And like beef, for example, is on that no, not to eat list. So I'm already kind of contributing, not by choice, but just by circumstance. We have to eat more and less unprocessed plants. More unprocessed plants. Sorry, less processed meat. It says that's good for the climate. That's good for obesity. Well, sure, less fat people around is so much better for everything. We need to get people out of cars, which they're sitting in by themselves, sitting in traffic for hours on end, which is immensely damaging to health. And at least carpooling, but ideally we have to develop more public transport and encourage biking and walking if it's possible. So yeah, I was in Moscow about like 10 years ago, and my cousin said that the one second. Shit. Hey, that's live TV for you folks. I just get back on track here. So I was in Moscow about 10 years ago, and my cousin there, we were driving from the airport to an apartment, and he told me that basically about 30 years ago, not everybody in Moscow could afford a car. But now even a secretary, like a low-paid secretary, can afford a car. So you get one person per one car. And that's a huge issue there. I mean, they have like huge traffic jams in Moscow, and just like in America, in LA, etc. So this is not something like new, but this one person per one car, that is very damaging indeed. In trying to stop the spread of coronavirus, we are incidentally benefiting the climate. We're consuming less, producing less, flying and driving less, and we're seeing lower air pollution around cities. And people looked at that and they said, okay, wow, that's great, we have defeated climate change. I know people who think like that. Unfortunately, they're out there, and they don't understand that the fight is just beginning. The reality of the situation is that yes, we might see a tiny drop in emissions, that period, let's say like January 2020 to about May 2020. Just like we saw a small dip in emissions when the economic crisis hit back in 2009. I talked about that on the previous show. My shows kind of build on the previous shows, so please watch them because your questions have probably been answered elsewhere already, and I don't want to repeat myself too often. What we're looking at right now in the reality is there's so much air pollution, and it's embedded in the business, the way that we're doing business right now. So if we stop so much pollution, we improve the lives of people. That's true. Yep, okay. So 3 years ago, I'm not exactly sure because I don't follow too much. So I'm not sure how his name is pronounced. It should be Fauci or Fauci. Let's go with Fauci. So Dr. Fauci predicted that we'd get hit with an infection disease outbreak. So 3 years ago, he said that. And guess what? We didn't pay attention. Chinese didn't pay attention much either. Let's pretend that we all heard him and listened 3 years ago. Maybe if we started cutting emissions back then, we could have saved some people's lives by now. That's true. But we didn't do that at all. Instead, in fact, even now, people are trying to get back to normal, get back to business as usual. So let's go back to emitting as much as possible, even more. I mean, the emissions have really exploded since the 50s. If you look at the curve, it really goes up really sharply after the 50s. That's when we started to produce more. And of course, the population of the world ballooned as well. That's when it started. So air pollution is clearly driving the severity of the disease. Air pollution in the States, in the first time in decades, has gotten worse in the past 2 years. And this is because Trump and his goons in power repealed some environmental protection plans, orders. And that's why we have that. There's no surprise here whatsoever. It shouldn't shock anybody. If you repeal, or like environmental rules, of course the corporations are going to start polluting again, and the air is going to basically decrease in quality for sure. And again, coming back to obesity here, with all pollution and the obesity concerns that tie climate and COVID together, being poor amplifies those risks tremendously. And that's what I said also. So, you got people like Greta Thunberg, and I'm pretty sure she's well off. She's from Sweden, she's white, she has access to medical health care, she has access to education, she's all set pretty much. But if you talk to some poor farmer in Niger, or I don't know, Ghana or Mali, in some kind of Pacific island nation, for them the situation is completely different. Okay, they don't have access to good healthcare, they don't have access to good education, and they're poor. And if the water rises in those places, they have nowhere to go, and that's a big thing. We already saw that communities in the States have been ravaged. The poor communities have been ravaged in contrast to those who are better off. And people who can work from home, these are people who are making, like about 100K a year, okay? So a lot of people who are very vulnerable to COVID-19 are people who are poor, people who work paycheck to paycheck, which in the States case is about 75% of the population, of the workers, I should say. We could have had policies, for example, that made sure that poor people in this country are not poor, and they have access to medical health care. So yes, we could have, but guess what? We have a pro-profit plan run by the insurance companies, and they don't want that. They want to make as much money as possible because they have to pay off their CEOs huge premiums. So yes, universal health care. Well, Bernie Sanders talked about it. Elizabeth Warren talked about it a little bit, but I think she flip-flopped on that. Biden is not offering that at all, so that's not even on the table. So one reason not to vote for him. Andrew Yang, I think, had something like that, although I'm not entirely sure in detail what his plan was. But he also proposed UBI, and UBI would help poor people because, hey, every month we give you $1,000. And some people will say, okay, but if you start doing that, then the people who take the rent, they're going to increase the rent. So for example, from $500, it's going to be now that 1,000 that you get. That's true, but guess what? In other countries, it does not happen. And why is that? Because of strong regulation. So you have to regulate those assholes that try to do that. So in Japan too, in Japan, not all laws are perfect, but they do control certain things very well here. So the healthcare here is awesome. Very good indeed. So yeah, I'm all for providing opportunities for people and jobs. I mean, this has to be on the table. So just saying I'm not Trump, that's not enough to win a campaign. I'm sorry. You have to put something on the table, and then we have to decide whether to vote on it or not. So what can be done now to be ready for the next pandemic? Because you know that there's one coming. There's always one around the corner. Permafrost areas somewhere are thawing out. There's bacteria frozen right now, and that's going to come to the surface, and that's going to be spread by mosquitoes and ticks. So how do we prepare for that? Well, they estimate here that the government's reactions is that they spent about, I think this is in the world, they spent about $7 trillion to try to clean up this mess. And only a fraction of that, just about 100 billion a year, which is not a lot of money, by the way, a year in the world, would be enough to do what many conservation biologists say would be adequate for providing safe operating space for wildlife. But we're not going to do that. Sorry. I mean, I said on the last show, I'm a very pessimist person when it comes to that. I just don't see it happening. I think it just underscores that we need to refocus our attention on doing what we can to keep the diseases at bay, and that in large part means we have to combat climate change, and we have to combat the root cause of biodiversity loss, the destruction of life on Earth. And that's it for this article. So yes, Look, the solutions and the reactions to climate change and COVID-19 are kind of the same. Uh, People are protesting both. Uh, the deforestation, especially, is very dangerous because, again, you have like the Amazon, you got like the Indonesian Amazon forest burning. They first of all they destroy forests, which we need for air, and they absorb CO2. So we lose that. We lose the ability to do that. And of course, there are animals that live there. So these animals now, because they lost their natural habitat, now they have to go somewhere else. And usually that means because a lot of the areas now are very urbanized, that means that these insects, etc., they go into places where people live and they contaminate the people. So that's very dangerous. And that's what we have to understand here. So I hope you found this educational. I certainly did. And I will see you next time. Bye bye. That's all for today's show. I'm just leaving the chat on. So for people who want to ask any questions or something, I noticed that I have one light here and I always forget to turn it on. Doesn't do a hell of a lot, actually. All right, well, saves me some effort. Can't move it, I see. I got it. Kind of interesting, actually, because let's see, a little bit less, a little bit less around here. I guess it helps a little bit. So again, for people who are watching, if you have questions related to the virus or climate change, now's the time to ask. It's a Q&A session now, so I'm exercising. Just gotta check the audio here. I'm exercising. Yeah, it's fine. Okay, so if there are no questions today, so I thank you for watching, those people who are there, and I will see you next week sometime. So I'm still editing the episode 61, and it's going to be in 2 parts because, again, people have short attention spans these days. But anyway, that will be done soon, pretty soon. And I will see you next time then. Bye bye.